Hello, welcome to the Frank Farmer Loomis Show. I'm Frank Farmer Loomis, delighted to be your host. And on the show, we're always talking about the wonderful things in Cincinnati, architecture, art, history, you name it. I have a really special guest for you today, Mr. Scott Santangelo. Scott, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Frank. Thank you.
Let's get right into it. Would you tell us what your title is? He is all about Music Hall.
I'm the Director of Operations at Music Hall.
So that means you're very, very busy.
Sometimes, yes.
And you do tours.
We do.
And you're very passionate about Music Hall. This man is passionate about Music Hall.
You can't work there and not be passionate about Music Hall.
I think everybody in Cincinnati is passionate about Music Hall. But before we get into all your history about Music Hall, let's just look over a little bit of Cincinnati's history. Scott, you know all this. It was founded in 1788. And the people came on the flat-bottom boats down the Ohio River. And right from the beginning, Cincinnati was a boom town, which benefits all of us. In 1800, it had a population, can you believe this, of 850 people. In 1804, a couple of blocks from your music hall, the first brick house was built, the Betts House. In 1810, the city had a population of 25 and 40 people. 1820, it almost quadrupled to 10,000. Then the Miami and Erie Canal, which passed by your place, didn't it?
Right behind Music Hall, along what's today Central Parkway.
Central Parkway, that came through in 1827. And in 1830, our city had a population of 25,000. An incredible city. By 1850, Scott and everybody, we had tons of people doing silver, 200 silver business. 1853, the first paid fire department in the U.S. of A. 1856, streetcar lines. And there were 800 saloons, 30 pool halls, 30 bowling alleys, many, many theaters, and lots of resorts down the river. And I'll let you guess what the resorts were. Let's get to you, Scott. In 1880, the city had a population, in 1881, of 255,000 people. What happened along the Miami and Erie Canal in 1878?
The Music Hall was first constructed. And Cincinnati in that era was the 7th largest city in the United States, the Paris of America, gateway to the West, Porkopolis, as a nod to its meatpacking industry.
I love that, Paris of America. Who was the architect?
Samuel Hannaford was selected, and though bids were let to architectural firms in Boston and New York, maybe not surprisingly, the Cincinnati firm of Hannaford and Proctor was awarded the bid.
Now, Hannaford also designed Music Hall, your Music Hall, but he also designed, the City Hall, didn't he?
City Hall, Memorial Hall, many other buildings in Cincinnati.
And Memorial Hall is your next-door neighbor, right?
That's right.
Right. Because in 1881, the Cincinnati Art Museum was started. Well, what's the style of Music Hall? Because I was teaching a class at UC recently, and we were talking about Queen Anne's style. We were talking about Italianate. But doesn't Music Hall come under a different type of style?
Well, I've heard it described in several ways. High Victorian Gothic, modern Gothic, Cincinnati parlance might say Byzantine, Sauerbraten Byzantine is another term I've heard.
Sauerbraten Byzantine.
Which I love. I think that's a very Cincinnati, affectionate reference to Music Hall.
Yeah, I think those are great titles, except sometimes it sort of complicates for the novice trying to learn architectural styles. But I love that. Sauerkraut.
Sauerbraten Byzantine.
Oh, Brauten. Byzantine, all right. And it's made out of brick. And what was the purpose of Music Hall when it was brand new?
Music Hall was constructed as a grand choral hall for the singing groups who were found throughout the tri-state. It was, choral music was hugely popular in that era, but the city quickly adapted this new hall to the uses of the industrial exhibitions for which Cincinnati was also nationally well known.
Yeah, because it had, by 1881, it had a population of 255,000 people.
Right.
Big, big guns. It was a boom town, and they had all these Silversmith and Mitchell and Ramsburg furniture and everything. So when Music Hall was constructed, it wasn't on virgin territory, was it? What had been there before on the site?
Earlier,
this is kind of crazy.
Earlier in the century, that site had been a pauper's cemetery, or pauper's field, a burial ground for the poor. Behind the building was the city's first hospital, the Cincinnati Commercial Hospital and Lunatic Asylum, variously used as a poorhouse or an orphanage. And then following the cholera epidemic of in the 1830s, an orphanage was built on that site, later converted for use as a pest house or basically a quarantine house for the hospital. So if you were unfortunate enough to die in any of those places, had no one to claim your remains, more likely than not, you'd be buried in the pauper cemetery.
Well, I think that's all fascinating because across from Central Parkway was the earliest Jewish cemetery west of the Alleghenies, which is still there.
Yep.
And the people bought the land from Nicholas Longworth of the Taft House. I think they paid $75. And then what was where Washington Park is today? What was that?
Washington Park was formal cemetery ground for 3 churches in the over-the-Rhine area. And the city acquired that site in the 1850s, requested the remains be relocated, though the newspapers of the time reported that some unscrupulous people pocketed the stipends that had been made available to do that. The city's solution to that problem was to put topsoil over the entire site and to plant trees. So that was the genesis for Washington Park.
You know, I think that's funny because it's exactly the same thing in Chicago with Lincoln Park. That was a city cemetery also, and as the city kept growing north, like Cincinnati kept, they did the same thing, except that in Lincoln Park, there's one mausoleum left standing there. So does, you know, when getting ready for this show and everything, I was reading that, is this true? I find this hard to believe, but you love music hall, and it's a great place. Are there ghosts there?
I will not say there are not. And Eric Kunzel, the former conductor of the Pops, was quite firm in his belief that there were. And it's widely viewed as a haunted building. There are a lot of stories from a lot of people going back to the time when Music Hall was first constructed, and we have a lot of fun with that today. We get a lot of coverage, and we're just featured in the Ghost Hunters program. So I think perhaps the suspension of disbelief is not a bad thing as you learn more about the history of the building.
And we have the great William Fry, and he is very dear to your heart at Music Hall.
One of the great Cincinnati art carvers. Benjamin Pittman, William Fry made huge contributions to the original building in developing the carved panels that decorated the original pipe organ, one of the largest in the world at the time.
You were showing me that, and the leaves are almost 3-dimensional, aren't they?
Oh, some of the panels are incredible high relief carvings.
Tell me something. Do you remember what type of wood it was carved out of?
I believe they're cherry wood.
Cherry, which is kind of unusual, but if you want to see some more, go to the Cincinnati Art Museum in the Cincinnati wing at the rear. They have Ben Pittman carving and William Fry carving and everything like that. Now, what role did Patricia and Ralph Corbett have in all of this?
J. Ralph and Patricia Corbett were the philanthropists of the 1970s who are really credited with saving Music Hall from the wrecking ball in that era. The city was in a huge rush to modernize itself. We lost many wonderful old theaters at that time. Not the Taft.
Albee, next door to the
The
Taft.
Albee, the Palace, the Schubert, and the Grand are good examples of theaters that are no more. But the Music Hall always was a special place. And when the city built its new convention center closer to the heart of downtown, many of the traditional uses for Music Hall fell away, and there was talk about it being no longer serve the purpose for which it had been built, very expensive to renovate, and there was talk about tearing it down. J. Ralph and Patricia Corbett stepped up and pledged several million of their own dollars to see the building extensively renovated and modernized, leveraged public support for that project, and the return on that investment has been incredible.
The Corbett's Foundation did a lot of things to help beautify and preserve history here in Cincinnati. So my God, that was it restored the first time around 1977 or something like that? Was it, or before then?
It was right at the end of the 60s and the
60.
beginning of the 70s.
So it was that dangerous era because it was, when the Abbey was torn down and everything. And it's wonderful that that's preserved. And when you go into I call it the lobby. That's not the right word. The white
The foyer.
Foyer. Okay, the foyer. The white and gold, and you see the portraits of the Corbetts by Carl Sampson.
Right.
It reminds me of going to a palace in Europe, the white and gold and everything. But what was that room originally? Was it always white and gold?
No, the early decorative scheme for Music Hall was much darker, natural wood, glass panels in the doors, and it effectively was an exhibit space connected to the other buildings, the North and South exhibition halls. And it was much darker. So the white and gold scheme came in the renovations of the 1890s.
1890s renovations, everybody. That's
right?
Yeah.
Music Hall's been renovated many times throughout its life, though the renovations of the 70s were a benchmark. Modern safety systems, air conditioning.
Thank God.
Fire suppression, safety, escalators. So a lot of modern conveniences were built in at that time.
And was that the time the gorgeous crystal chandeliers were added? You were telling me.
Yes.
They were
Yep. Many people love the chandeliers when they come to Music Hall, but they are not original to the building, and they are wonderful accents and grace notes that the Corbetts found in their travels through Europe and brought back.
They're perfect for the place. Because the
They do.
original ones probably were like, Sauerbraten Byzantine or Steamboat Gothic, something like that.
Well,
with
they
the
were
shape.
much plainer globe fixtures. Some of them were mounted on the newel posts, as you might see in an old home. And in the auditorium, there was a suite of much smaller fixtures. Certainly, Music Hall would have been lit by gas fixtures in its earliest configuration. But the chandeliers really add that old world elegance and glitter.
Glitter.
And they certainly are a
nicest.
compliment. Everyone remembers them.
Did it have indoor plumbing when it was brand new? Has that ever come up?
It did, though it was not as expansive as it is today.
Yes.
And certainly the demand for that has not subsided. So
No, that's good because we've gotten a little bit lazy. I was reading that the British Museum in London, way back in 1840s, had 2 privies for the whole museum and everything. And it was the Crystal Palace in London in 1851 that it was the first public building in the world to have indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
So, my gosh, 1851 London. So this is 27 years later. It shows how incredible Cincinnati was and everything like that. So people come in and they look at those chandeliers and the foyer there. And you were telling me about the big crystal chandelier in the theater section. How that takes a lot of work to clean it, doesn't it?
it's a fantastic fixture. It's 21 feet in diameter. We clean it every couple of years, and it's lowered to the level of the seats. We'll build a platform over the seats, and the stagehands will actually climb up and into the chandelier. We'll clean every crystal by hand with distilled water and relamp all of the bulbs at that time.
Boy, oh boy. As you're there all the time and you're passionate about Music Hall, which is fantastic, do you have any stories? Can you dazzle us with stories of any famous people that have been there that when you were under your reign?
Well, for the 10 years that I've worked there, obviously we've had the symphony. We have the 5th oldest symphony in the country. We have the 2nd oldest opera company in the country. We have the longest running choral festival in the Western Hemisphere. So in any given week, you may see such artists as Yo-Yo Ma or Maya Angelou performed with the symphony literally months before she passed away. Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion live broadcast on Thanksgiving. That's been at Music Hall twice.
Wow.
The American Financial Christmas Party is the largest event of our year. It's coming up again. We're waiting to find out who their guest artist will be. But Music Hall's history stretches back and includes appearances by several presidents. While people associate Music Hall with the fine arts, they forget artists like Prince, Bruce Springsteen, Neil Young, Eric Clapton with Derek and the Dominos, Janis Joplin, Luciano Pavarotti, Miles Davis have performed there. It's an amazing place.
When you take people on tours, which you do all the time,
Yep.
what do you tell us a little bit about the tours? How do you start out and everything?
Well, the history of the building is rich and obviously goes back to the earliest days of Cincinnati's founding. The cemetery history is well known, but by the time Music Hall was being constructed in the 1870s, Cincinnati was a very vibrant place, and the musical heritage that prompted its construction has been an integral part of our community for many decades. So Music Hall survives today as a testament to those memories, and very few people in Cincinnati don't have a story that connects them to Music Hall in some way. Graduated there, went there as a student to see a show as a child, attended a special event, a wedding, business meeting. It's really an amazing hub for the city.
And I think it really has helped over the Rhine, too.
Oh, it's always...
OTR, excuse me, got to be cool here. OTR?
Yep.
Corridor District?
OTR, and it's amazing to see the community come back for Over the Rhine to be the epicenter for the revitalization of the downtown, to see streetcar tracks again in front of Music Hall, and then it'll go down race on the opposite side of Washington Park. It's a very exciting time to be in Cincinnati. There's a lot to be proud of.
Well, it's certainly, because the formal front of Music Hall faces Washington Park, right?
Yes. Yep.
And the back was the canal, and now it faces Central Parkway.
Exactly right.
But the back has the great big cornerstone on it, doesn't it? I think it's where it is, says 1878.
It does. 1877, actually.
1870. Thank you for correcting me. 1877. I always get that year wrong. Somehow I think it was like 1977 when it was restored. I don't know. Could be wrong. Wasn't it?
It was in the early 70s.
Earlier than that. See, I got that goofed up. That's good. I wanted to also ask you, you're constantly embellishing, making improvements in Music Hall. What are some of the things you're working on now?
Actually, we're in operations. We do a lot of simpler projects, stripping the foyer floor.
Well, you were showing the black and white floor, yes.
Actually, red slate and white marble.
Oh, it's red. So I thought it was black. No?
There are some black accents along the edge of the floor.
You're stripping that up.
And that'll be dramatic when it's complete. The Society for the Preservation of Music Hall recently supported the conservation of the statue of Reuben Springer.
Tell us who Reuben Springer was.
Reuben Springer was a retired merchant who effectively put the first money up to see Music Hall constructed. So the legend has it that he attended the May Festival, one of the earliest May festivals, and the building that had been on the site before Music Hall, the Sanger Hall, had a tin roof. And during the performance, a thunderstorm arose. The sound of the hail and the rain on the tin roof forced an interruption in the performance, and he conceived that the city needed a permanent building for this event, and he pledged half of the money that would be needed to build one.
I am in awe of what you know, the tin roof, because I always think of tin roofs lasting forever. But the hail would make noise and everything. Is that where the expression tin ear came from?
It may be,
Maybe
and I'm
not.
sure the roof may have lasted forever, but it was entirely unsuited to the purpose for which the building was used.
When you look at photographs of Music Hall through we could say centuries, because it's in its third century now.
Yep.
Did the brick did it get real grimy with the pollution and everything that was in the city, or did it always stay?
No, it actually did. And in the 1970s, the most appropriate way to deal with that was a light sandblasting, which I think was regretted later, because that's a very abrasive process of cleaning the brick. So we wouldn't do that today, though it was done certainly with the best of intentions.
Oh
at the
yeah,
time.
we learn all the time. But I think that's one of the great things that has helped historic preservation, is that our cities are not polluted like they used to be. Because can you imagine looking at Music Hall? Well, you wouldn't, it'd be your nightmare with all that grime on it and everything.
Right. We spend a lot of time, and it's an ongoing process to tuck point areas of the building, re-roof certain areas of the building. So it's ongoing. The care and maintenance of Music Hall is never done.
You know, one of the things that I love about Music Hall, in the foyer, everybody, as you walk in, let's say through the main door, right, Scott?
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Straight ahead are the Corbetts, and to the right is this large gilt on gesso mirror. What's the story? That's quite a mirror, isn't it?
That we refer to that as the Lincoln Mirror because it was donated for Music Hall. It's huge. It comes from the Burnett House, which was the hotel in downtown Cincinnati where everyone stayed when they came through, including President Lincoln on his way to his inauguration in 1861. So it's widely believed he would have adjusted his hat or his tie in the mirror as he stayed there.
I love it that he stayed at the Burnett House, and he stayed there 2 times. And the first time, like you said, on his way to be president of the U.S. of A., but the time before that, he was drumming up, trying to get the nomination and everything, and he thought the Republicans had paid his bill at the Burnett House, and they didn't. And he gets the bill from the manager, and he was billed for booze and everything, and he says, I don't drink and everything. So Mr. Lincoln, they adjusted the bill, and he paid it right away. The Burnett House was an incredible hotel. That's sort of a bad example of how something did not get preserved that should have been preserved. And recently, you've had some great events going on there, and one has returned to Music Hall, a great tradition.
Well, in our ballroom, we've had the Cincinnati Antiques Festival just this past month, which was very well received. Great attendance for it. And we had the Design Build show even more recently. And following Thanksgiving this year, the Crafty Supermarket. So the use of our ballroom as for trade shows is kind of coming back, which is nice. The renovation of Over the Rhine, the park, has really contributed to Music Hall being more part of its community, which I think is a return to the original model.
No, it's incredible, and OTR is booming, and I think it has a lot to do with your Music Hall. And
Absolutely.
You think Music Hall was built like 6 years after the Chicago fire, 12 years at the ending of the Civil War. Just a great testimony how incredible Cincinnati is. So you can go there and hear music, and then you could go antiquing. What's the craft supermarket? What's that?
The Crafty Supermarket is a show that features small vendors who are primarily the people who make everything.
Okay.
So they're all individual craft vendors with very unique and individual products. Great place to do your Christmas shopping.
Now, Scott, I know everybody's been to Music Hall, but let's pretend we just moved here and everything. How would you suggest for a first-time visit how to take it all in at Music Hall? What would you suggest doing?
Well, we have walk-in visitors all the time from all over the world. But if I were to visit Music Hall, I would attend a symphony performance. Or if the timing were good, the May Festival, because that's what Music Hall was first constructed for. And again, the longest running choral festival in the Western Hemisphere, the May Festival. We have so much to be proud of, and that's definitely one of the things I'd visit.
That's great. And walk around the lobby and go up on the second floor. I always remember just looking up at that chandelier. And that's another advantage. It's less expensive sitting up. Is it the second balcony? Is that the correct word?
The gallery is
Gallery.
Yep.
You get a breathtaking view of that chandelier. But if you were sitting up there, you'd say, oh, they missed a spot over here or missed it over there.
No, I think we got every bit of it.
Did you really?
Yep.
Good. So are you putting in, did you tell me you're going to be putting in more restrooms or not?
Discussions about renovation of Music Hall have been underway for some years now, and we have a start date in May of 2016. We are looking forward to making a lot of improvements.
I think it's beautiful already. But.
It is, and the goal, though, is to make sure the patrons who visit have a really quality experience, and it's our generation's turn to step up and address some of those conditions that make it a little less so.
Every time I talk to you about Music Hall, I know it sounds trite, but I love your passion about it, the whole thing. Tell us a little bit, and we have about 5 more minutes. Tell us a little bit about your job there. Like, what are you doing besides being the Goodwill ambassador?
Well, in the operations department, the Cincinnati Arts Association manages the property for the city of Cincinnati. We also manage the Aronoff Center for the state. So there are a lot of constituencies that we answer to. We have the Opera, Symphony, and May Festival as our resident companies. So their offices are in the building. So for practical daily purposes, we're heating and cooling that space for the office uses of the residents, but also for their rehearsals, auditions, special events, and of course their performances. And then the building's rented to third parties for private events, weddings, corporate meetings, everything you can imagine. So that keeps us pretty busy. And of course, maintaining the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, working with the city on future projects, roof projects.
Oh, say no more, I understand about
coordinating with the park, and on and on.
No, it's fantastic. And I thought we'd end the show today going back. Tell me the wonderful story when I was there visiting you a couple months ago about the carved panels and how they're back in Music Hall.
I think that's the other really great thing about working at Music Hall is you're working in living history. So the original Music Hall had one of the largest pipe organs in the world on its stage, and it was decorated with a carved wooden screen consisting of dozens of panels that were done by local artists, notably William Fry and Benjamin Pittman, but also women who worked in their studios.
Elizabeth Norris and a lot of different women worked under their tutelage, yeah.
Yep, and so when the organ was found to be, it could not be restored in the renovations of the 1970s, it was basically discarded. But the carved panels were divided. Some went to the art museum, some decorated the inside of one of our orchestra pits. A few others were placed on the walls in our North Hall. The Society for the Preservation of Music Halls engaged in a project to see all of those panels brought back together and properly conserved to their original condition. That's underway right now.
And you just received a couple of panels, didn't you?
We've gotten one back that's completely done, and it is spectacular.
It is spectacular. We'll look forward to seeing that in the future. Thank you, Scott Santangelo. Scott, thank you for being on the show today and sharing things about Music Hall that you can't read on a website. You brought it all alive. I want to thank everybody here at Anderson Township Cable TV, Beverly Schneider, Nikki Bishop. Thank you all, and take care.